with banks, and I invite expert of regional Serhiy Zayets, expert at the NGO Regional Center for Human Rights. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. I would like once again to draw attention to what we are tired of talking about. To open discrimination we have in Ukraine as to Crimean residents. The situation the problem started last year in November when National Bank of Ukraine introduced additional requirements or additional obstacles for Crimeans to be able to use bank services, and all of them from Crimea, they became recognized as not residents. People who have registration, in other words, registered in Crimea or in Sevastopol, because the bank recognized them non-residents, they introduced a special mode to provide bank services, special mode of bank accounts, which does not allow to make operations and to do business, to get payments, to open card accounts, etc. And this introduction of special requirements to people because of the territorial where they live, whereabouts, and that's discrimination. So if we take any other citizen from Ukraine, from Lviv or Kharkiv, they can go to any region of Ukraine and they can go to a bank and show their passport and get bank services like the rest. But if it's about someone who in whose passport it says that they are in Crimea, from Crimea, it's not so. The bank will suggest to open as a bank account as non-resident. It will mean that from common people, that person will not be able to get payments, or they will suggest to give a document that such a person is an IDP. In December, when they saw that something was wrong, National Bank tried to correct the situation, but nothing worked. National Bank introduced again some changes to that regulation, and that provides if someone who has registered in Crimea and if registered as IDP and provides documents for that, that person is not considered to be non-resident, considered as resident, can use bank services as the rest. But that didn't solve the problem, because banks started to close bank accounts in such a case. They opened before, they started to block money on them, and they started to open other accounts referring to the requirement of that regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. In March, additional present came from, it was a regulation of the National Bank, and in March, Cabinet of Ministers made a gift, and they put changes, made amendments to IDPs, and they provide that the location of living should be confirmed by checking that. So representatives of police can visit them, and then they will see that the person lives there. Only in such a case a document is valid. If they don't find that person because of a trip or because of any other temporary reason or absence at the place of their living, that document can be cancelled, so that person is again without rights. So if it's about any other person, about any other citizen of Ukraine from any other region of Ukraine and from any registration, they can move around Ukraine freely, and they will not feel any discomfort if they, for example, if they are registered in one Frankivsk, Lutsk, or anywhere else. At the same time, so nobody will examine where that person lives. So nobody checks. When I say about registration of the place of living, it's not provided. Nobody checks if a person really lives there, where they are registered. Only IDPs, they are under such examination. And if we look at further, that document that they received, it is only for 6 months. So in 6 months, such person has to go and get documents to get. They need to postpone or continue the validity of the document or to get a new document. All this in addition to a violation of rights of citizens of Crimea to get bank sources. It brings us to stigmatization of Crimeans that builds a negative attitude to people who left temporarily occupied territory and who moved to the mainland Ukraine. Such attitude to confirm this and from time to time to get for the registration. That attitude is common to the situations when it's about people who were imprisoned and who are under administrative supervision. So people who are suspects to some extent and who are inclined to antisocial behavior. In the same situation, we have Crimeans, and there are no reasons to say that. And the damage is very high because from time to time there are issues related to the status of Crimeans. Because certain regulations, paragraphs of the legislation are misinterpreted, misunderstood, there are problems with getting a job, etc., etc. All these problems, luckily, they don't have legal basis, but it happens because there was such a little flag, like they were marked as strange people, foes.
And this is the most detrimental thing. But of course, the detriment from raising those additional barriers in order to get usual services is rather significant and is being felt by anyone who has a registration in Crimea. When I told you that the National Bank of Ukraine tried to solve this issue, first of all, I do say that the demand to get this certificate is discriminatory in itself, but in fact there is a rather big category of people who cannot get this certificate, that they are IDPs. For instance, the persons who left the territory of Crimea earlier than March 2014, those who went to the continental part of Ukraine not because of the occupation of Crimea, but because they had some job here or any other reason, you know, they also cannot register their place of residence and get registration in Kiev or anywhere else in the continental part of Ukraine. And this means that they are persons with registration in Crimea, and they're being treated as non-residents. And as the status of IDP is given only to those who left the temporarily occupied territory as a result of its occupation, they cannot get this document, and they cannot even, with the help of unpleasant procedures, avoid unpleasant after effects. But if they, in order to get such documents, disclose non-truthful information, then they will be breaking the law. And of course, this information can be checked, especially if this person does have a permanent job. In the the Regional Center for Human Rights, with the support of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group on Human Rights, is appealing against the resolution of the National Bank of Ukraine dated 3rd of November last year, and the consideration hearing on this appeal is scheduled for the 15th of April. In any case, this is not just about canceling a certain resolution, but it's about discrimination. Regrettably, while they have rather correctly heard the position of those who appeal and having correctly used the practice of the European Court of Human Rights, the court of the first instance did quote the practice that corroborates the discrimination, but still they have not said that this is a discrimination. In any case, this case will be brought to the attention of the European Court of Human Rights, but we ask the National Bank, the government, and the bodies of executive power to more actively involve public into drawing such documents and to treat those problems in a more attentive way, because the decision of the European Court is good and we need it in any case, so that to avoid the repetition of such practice, but we will demand the correction of the situation in any which way we could. We have offered our cooperation in order to look for the ways to solve the situation, in order to rectify the decision that was made incorrectly by the National Bank and other bodies. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues? The Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, could you be more precise? Which is the way to solve the situation that you suggest? In order to suggest a way of solving the issue, we have to understand what is the aim that the government or the National Bank are pursuing while they are setting up such rules. The only thing that they said was that such restrictions are used in order to provide for the fulfillment of the law of the Ukraine on registration, but this law does not stipulate the necessity to provide any ID or any certificate in the banking sphere, and this is not the grounds to use any discriminatory measure. Of course, if we're talking about avoiding taxes or laundering the money that was gained in a criminal way, you still have to explain this. You have to show the mechanisms by which this is done. But at the moment, the National Bank does not have any arguments even about why this was done. More than that, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the difference in attitude is evident, and we have grounds to suspect the discrimination in this case. According to the legislation of Ukraine, it requires anti-discrimination expertise, examination. At the moment, in this case, the National Bank provided the anti-discrimination examination results, which is composed of 4 lines, 2 of which is the name of this document. And it says that there's no discrimination, but as I told you, we have grounds to believe that there is discrimination, and we have to examine the situation further in order to arrive at the conclusion whether there is or discrimination or no. And this means whether there's a rational foundation and justification for the normative document. After they have explained clearly what is the aim of this act, then we can apply further efforts. At the moment, we're talking about canceling all the limitations and providing the Crimeans with an opportunity to use all the banking services. The arguments of the National Bank, I think they say that they have adopted this resolution because there are respective norms in the law on the free economic zone, where it says that the subjects who are registered in Crimea are treated as non-residents. So does this adhere to the norms of the free economic zone? On the other hand, not all the banks use this norm, and not all the banks demand certificates from the people who are registered in Crimea. Do you know who does this and who does not? Well, really, I don't have information about banks who do not use the relevant requests and demands. Those who were really fulfilling this decision, we can talk about Raiffeisenbank Aval, Ukrbank, BM Bank, and I think Delta Bank. But first of all, this is not topical anymore, and then I'm not quite sure. So these are the banks about which we have a documented confirmation that they demand a certificate. I don't know about any bank that would not demand the certificate. The only thing that the banks can do, they can shut their eyes to the older accounts and not to see that it's about the accounts opened by the Crimeans, but the banks that I named do use the respective resolution of the National Bank. They use it in different ways. First, in some cases, they just change the character of the account. In some cases, they demand to close the former account and to open a new one, which would be a resident account. And about the use, the application of the law. Look, if we take the law, then, generally speaking, the National Bank of Ukraine has only three authorities. First, to designate the peculiarity of payments from Crimea to Ukraine or from Ukraine to Crimea, between the territories, I mind you, not between the persons. And they do not have the right to limit the rights of persons. Then the amount of cash that people can export to the Crimean territory or to the other territories of Ukraine. We are talking here about Russian rubles and taking them through different territories of Ukraine, and this is stipulated by the law. And again, it's about the import of currency, 9.2, 9.1, and sub 0.4 in Article 9 of this law. If we're talking about non-residents, then the National Bank says that the people who live in Crimea, when they are moving commodities through the administrative border, then this is being treated as import. I don't want to talk about this law now, but nowhere it says that the National Bank has to limit the access of such persons to some banking services or to introduce any additional demands. More than that, this law says that after they have left the temporarily occupied territory, Ukraine guarantees for them the rights at the same level as for other persons. And I was talking here about people who are registered in Crimea, but who are in the territory of continental Ukraine. And these are the persons who, first of all, feel negative attitude towards them, although the law says that they do have the same rights as other citizens. Anyone who has left the territory of Crimea does have the same rights as other Ukrainians, but the National Bank does not think so. The National Bank says that they first have to prove, and if they prove that they have left the Crimean territory after occupation, then they have to repeat this procedure every half year.
You told, if I understood you correctly, that the situation with those people, Crimeans who left before occupation, is a deadlock situation. Could you say how many people are under that? Do you have some data? I don't have such data, and I doubt that there is statistics, because citizens of Ukraine, luckily, attitude to institute of registration of the place of living was more formal, because services could be provided through one window, so-called one window, that the document lost its importance, and it became again important because of what the National Bank of Ukraine did. I don't think that there is some statistics of migration. Somebody is responsible for that. I don't know even about which number of people we can talk about, but there are enough of them to speak about this problem, and we found such a problem. Any question? No questions. Thank you very much, Serhiy. Next brief.